"The system says otherwise, sir." The gate agent's voice was sharp, a fine point of annoyance in the chaotic symphony of the airport terminal. Arthur Pendleton, 81 years old, stood before her, his posture straight but his frame weathered by time. He held his boarding pass in a hand spotted with age, the paper trembling almost imperceptibly. "I believe there's been a mistake," he said, his own voice a low, gentle rumble easily lost in the cacophony. "My ticket includes priority boarding." The agent, a woman in her late 20s with a name tag that read Brenda, offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a corporate smile, a thin veneer of courtesy over a bedrock of impatience. "All our loyalty members get priority, sir, but we're boarding global premier status first. You're in boarding group 3. She gestured dismissively toward the growing queue of other passengers. "You'll have to wait." Arthur looked from his pass to the glowing screen above her head. It clearly displayed now boarding priority guests. He was a man who believed in order, in the simple logic of rules followed and promises kept. This felt like a small tear in the fabric of that understanding. "It says priority right here. I'm traveling to a reunion. For my old unit, it's important I get settled." Brenda's smile tightened. The line behind Arthur was growing longer, a collective sigh of restless travelers. She tapped a series of keys on her terminal, the clacking of the plastic loud and aggressive. "Sir, the computer assigns the groups. I can't change what the computer says. If you don't have global premier status, you'll have to step aside." She did not look at him as she spoke, her attention already focused on the next passenger, a man in a tailored suit who was impatiently checking his watch. The man shifted his expensive leather briefcase, nudging Arthur's simple canvas duffel bag with the toe of his polished shoe. He didn't apologize. Arthur stood his ground, not out of defiance, but out of a quiet confusion. He had paid for this. He had the documentation. In his world, that meant something. He tried again, his voice steady. "Young lady, perhaps if you just look at my identification." He began to reach for the worn leather wallet in his jacket pocket, a gesture he had made thousands of times. It was a slow, deliberate movement, the kind a man makes when his joints ache with the memory of colder, harder days. Brenda finally looked at him, her frustration boiling over into open condescension. "Sir, I don't have time to examine everyone's personal effects. The policy is the policy. It's for our most valuable customers." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial hiss that was somehow more insulting than a shout. "Unless your wallet is hiding a global premier card, it's not going to help you. Now please, step out of the line. You're holding everyone up." The man in the suit behind him muttered, "For God's sake, just move, old man." Around them, the crowd's energy shifted. Heads turned. Phones, which had been passive screens of distraction, were now angled slightly, their small black lenses taking in the scene. A low murmur went through the waiting area. It was the familiar, uncomfortable theater of public humiliation, and Arthur was its unwilling star. He didn't flush with anger or raise his voice. A deep weariness settled into his bones, a feeling far heavier than his 81 years. He had been dismissed by experts, by people who held life and death in their hands. This, a dismissal by a gate agent over a boarding group, felt both trivial and profoundly wrong. Brenda, sensing his hesitation as a challenge to her authority, decided to escalate. "Frank, can you come here a second?" she called out. A supervisor, a man with a tired paunch and a clipboard, ambled over. He listened to Brenda's clipped, one-sided summary of the situation. "This gentleman won't accept his assigned boarding group. He's causing a disruption." Frank, the supervisor, didn't even make eye contact with Arthur. He addressed the air just over his shoulder. "Sir, you heard the agent. We have a flight to board. Either get in your assigned line or we can book you on a later flight. Your choice." The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no room for appeal. Arthur was no longer a passenger. He was a problem to be managed. He looked at the faces in the crowd. He saw pity on some, irritation on most, and a cold indifference on others. He felt a familiar loneliness, the kind that finds you not when you're by yourself but when you're surrounded by people who do not see you. With a quiet sigh that was more breath than sound, he clutched the handle of his duffel bag and began to step away from the podium, his shoulders slumping just a fraction. As he did, his worn wallet, which he had been holding, slipped from his grasp. It fell to the floor with a soft thud, spilling a few of its contents onto the grimy linoleum. A faded, creased photograph of a young woman, a fishing license from 1978, and a small, folded piece of thick, yellowed paper. Brenda rolled her eyes. "Sir, please pick up your things. You're creating a hazard." Arthur bent down slowly, his knees protesting. As his fingers closed around the folded paper, the world around him seemed to muffle for a heartbeat. The sterile scent of the airport cleaner, the incessant announcements, the drone of the crowd. It all faded away, replaced by the smell of metallic blood and damp earth. He wasn't at Gate C-26 at JFK anymore. He was in the Aishau Valley. He could feel the slick mud under his palms, could hear the rhythmic thwump-thwump of helicopter blades getting fainter, leaving them behind. He could hear the panicked breathing of Private Miller beside him, the kid who was only 19, the kid with a sucking chest wound. The air was thick with the scream of incoming fire, and in his hand was not a wallet but the pressure bandage he was trying to hold against Miller's wound. The folded paper in his wallet was his Silver Star citation. He hadn't looked at it in years, but his fingers remembered its texture, its weight. It was the official summary of the worst and somehow the proudest day of his life. A day when being dismissed was not an option. He blinked, and the memory receded, leaving a ghost of adrenaline in its wake. He was back on the cold floor of the terminal, the supervisor tapping his foot impatiently. Arthur slowly gathered his things, his hand closing protectively around the old paper before tucking it safely back into his wallet. He said nothing. He simply retreated to the side, near a row of hard plastic chairs to wait. Across the seating area, a young man named Leo had watched the entire exchange. A history major in his junior year of college, he was flying home for the weekend. He hadn't paid much attention at first, just another airport dispute. But something about the old man's quiet dignity had held his focus. He saw the way the gate agent spoke down to him, the supervisor's utter lack of interest. He saw the wallet fall, and he saw something else. On the lapel of the old man's simple tweed jacket was a tiny, almost unnoticeable pin. It was tarnished and dull, but Leo recognized the design from his textbooks. It was the Combat Infantryman badge, and when the old man had mentioned his unit, the 173rd Airborne, a jolt had gone through him. The Sky Soldiers. Legends. Leo felt a hot surge of anger, the kind of righteous indignation that only the young and idealistic can truly feel. This wasn't right. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the camera icon. But filming felt passive, exploitative. It wouldn't help the man. It would only document his humiliation. Then another idea sparked. His favorite professor, Dr. Albright, was a retired Army colonel who now taught military history. They were close, and Leo had his personal number for a research project they were working on. He knew the professor had connections. It was a long shot, a crazy idea, but the sight of Arthur Pendleton sitting alone, so thoroughly dismissed, pushed him to act. He found a quieter corner near the newsstand and dialed. "Leo, is everything all right?" Dr. Albright's voice was warm and academic. "Professor, I'm at JFK, Gate C-26. You're not going to believe what I just saw." Leo quickly recounted the scene, his words tumbling out in a rush of frustration. He described the gate agent, the supervisor, and the old man's quiet resilience. "It was just awful, sir. They treated him like he was nothing." "Airports can be impersonal, Leo. It's an unfortunate part of modern travel." "No, sir, it's more than that," Leo insisted. "He mentioned his unit, the 173rd, and I think I saw a CIB on his jacket. His name is Arthur Pendleton." The agent said it loud enough for me to hear. There was a sudden dead silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that is heavier and more potent than any sound. For a full 5 seconds, the only thing Leo could hear was his own heartbeat. When Dr. Albright spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The warm academic tone was gone, replaced by a steely, urgent command. "Leo, what was that name again?" "Arthur Pendleton, sir." Another pause. Then, "Son, are you absolutely certain?" "Yes, sir. Why?" "Leo, listen to me very carefully. Do not let that man out of your sight. Do not let him board that plane until I tell you. I don't care what you have to do. Fake a medical emergency. Pull the fire alarm. I'm not kidding. I will handle the consequences. Just keep him there. I have to make a call." The line went dead. Leo stared at his phone, his mind reeling. He had expected a sympathetic ear, perhaps a suggestion to file a complaint. He had not expected an order that sounded like it belonged in a spy movie. He looked back over at Arthur, who was now staring out the large terminal window at the plane he was meant to be on, his expression unreadable. Leo tucked his phone away and began walking back toward the gate, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a thrilling sense of impending justice. Inside a quiet, climate-controlled office at the Pentagon, a phone buzzed on a polished mahogany desk. The aide to General Marcus Thorne, a sharp-eyed major, answered it with practiced efficiency. It was a private line, reserved for calls of significance. He listened for a moment, his posture stiffening as he heard the name relayed by a very flustered retired colonel. "Sir, stand by," the major said, his voice tight. He put the call on hold and turned to his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing a secure database. He typed in the name, Pendleton, Arthur J. The file that appeared on the screen made him stop breathing for a second. It was flagged with more commendations than he had ever seen on a single service record. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, Bronze Star with Valor device, and there, at the top of the list was the one that made his blood run cold, Silver Star. He clicked on the citation. The summary was brief, almost offensively so for the events it described. Ashau Valley, 1968. Platoon ambushed, pinned down, radio operator killed, officer incapacitated. Then Sergeant Pendleton, wounded himself by shrapnel, had assumed command. He organized a defense, redistributed ammunition from the fallen, and single-handedly suppressed an enemy machine gun nest that had them zeroed in. The report concluded that his actions under fire were directly responsible for saving the lives of at least a dozen men. The major read it twice, then a third time. He looked at the black and white service photo of a young stone-faced sergeant, and then back at the name, Arthur Pendleton. The man was a living legend, a name whispered with reverence in the halls of the infantry school, and according to the colonel on the phone, he was currently being harassed by an airline gate agent at JFK. "Get me the general," the major snapped to his assistant, his voice cracking with urgency. "Now, and get me the Air Force liaison for the New York sector. Tell them it's a Protocol 1 situation. I want a uniformed escort at Gate C-26 in 15 minutes. Back at the gate, the final boarding call was echoing through the terminal. Brenda, feeling a smug sense of order restored, noticed Arthur still sitting by the window. He hadn't moved. In her mind, his quiet compliance had now morphed into sullenness, a silent protest that she found deeply unprofessional. She felt a final jab of indignation was in order, a reassertion of her absolute control over the situation. She marched over to him, her supervisor, Frank, trailing behind her like a loyal shadow. "Sir," she began, her tone dripping with false concern, "since you were unwilling to follow boarding instructions and caused a disturbance, we're going to have to ask you to wait here. Airport security will need to have a word with you before we can clear you for travel. It's just a formality, of course. For the safety of our other passengers." It was the final gratuitous twist of the knife. He was no longer just a difficult customer. He was now a potential security threat. Arthur looked up at her. For the first time, a flicker of something, not anger, but a profound and immense sorrow showed in his clear blue eyes. He had survived ambushes, artillery barrages, and the lonely terror of the jungle at night. To be branded a threat in this brightly lit, sterile world by this young woman who saw only a stubborn old man was an absurdity so great it was almost painful. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. What could he possibly say that she would understand? Just then a ripple went through the crowd. It started at the far end of the concourse and moved toward them like a wave. The ambient chatter of the terminal died down, replaced by a hushed silence. People were turning, their eyes wide, down the long corridor, moving with a speed and purpose that was utterly alien to the leisurely chaos of an airport, came a group of men. At the front was a man in the crisp, dark blue service dress uniform of the United States Air Force. He was a full colonel, his chest a neat, colorful rectangle of ribbons. Flanking him were 4 soldiers in army greens, their boots striking the polished floor in a synchronized rhythm that seemed to make the very air vibrate. They were not airport security. They were something else entirely. They moved through the gawking passengers as if they weren't there, their eyes fixed, their mission clear. The crowd parted for them instinctively. Brenda and Frank stared, their mouths slightly agape. They assumed the uniformed men were for a VIP, or perhaps a military dignitary on their flight. Brenda smoothed her blouse, preparing to offer her most professional greeting, but the colonel didn't even glance at her. His eyes scanned the gate area, passing over everyone until they landed on the old man sitting in the plastic chair. The colonel's brisk, determined march softened. He came to a stop directly in front of Arthur. For a moment he simply looked at the old soldier. Then, in the cavernous silence of the terminal, he brought his heels together with a sharp click. He raised his right hand in a salute so crisp, so precise it seemed to cut the air. "Mr. Pendleton." The colonel's voice was loud, clear, and ringing with a profound respect that bordered on reverence. "It is an honor, sir." Arthur, startled, looked up at the officer. He slowly, painfully pushed himself to his feet, his old training kicking in as he tried to return the gesture. The colonel gently placed a hand on his arm. "Please, sir." At ease. He then turned his gaze on Brenda and Frank. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glare as cold and hard as granite. Brenda felt a prickle of fear crawl up her spine. "Ma'am, I understand you've had some difficulty with this passenger," the colonel said, his voice dangerously quiet. He refused to follow our boarding policy," Brenda stammered, holding up her clipboard as if it were a shield. The colonel gave a short, mirthless laugh. His boarding policy. "Ma'am, do you have any idea who this is?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned slightly, so his voice would carry to the silent, watching crowd. "You are looking at Arthur Pendleton, Sergeant, United States Army, retired. On October 17, 1968, in the Ashau Valley, Sergeant Pendleton's platoon was caught in a coordinated ambush. With his commanding officer down and his platoon taking heavy casualties, Sergeant Pendleton, already wounded by shrapnel, took command." The colonel's voice grew stronger, each word a hammer blow of history. For 2 hours he moved between positions under constant withering enemy fire, redistributing ammunition, rendering aid to the wounded, and single-handedly silencing an enemy machine gun position that was tearing his men to pieces. His actions that day saved the lives of 12 men. For his gallantry, he was awarded the Silver Star. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The phones were all up now, not recording a spectacle of humiliation, but a moment of stunning vindication. The man in the tailored suit who had told Arthur to move now looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "This man's boarding policy," the colonel continued, his eyes boring into Brendan, "was written in blood and courage in a jungle half a world away. It grants him the right to get on any plane, in any seat, before any of us. Do you understand me?" Brenda could only nod, her face ashen. Frank the supervisor looked pale, his clipboard hanging uselessly at his side. At that moment the door to the jet bridge opened and a man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out. But he wasn't an airline official. He was tall, with silver hair and an air of unmistakable authority. The colonel and the soldiers immediately snapped to attention. "General Thorne," the colonel said. General Marcus Thorne had been sitting in seat 1. His aide's frantic call had reached him just as they were about to close the cabin door. He had listened, his face growing darker with every word. He walked past his escort and straight to the airline supervisor. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 4 stars. "What is your name?" "Frank, sir. Frank Miller." "Frank," the general said, his voice low and laced with ice. "Your airline's obsession with loyalty tiers and premium customers is about to get a lesson in what real value is. Your policy just allowed you and your staff to publicly disrespect a man to whom I, and this entire nation, owe an unpayable debt. This isn't a customer service failure. It's a failure of character." He then turned to Arthur, his entire demeanor softening. "Arthur, my God, I am so sorry you had to endure this." Arthur Pendleton, who had stood stoically through the entire recitation of his own heroism, simply shook his head. He looked at the terrified face of the young gate agent Brenda and offered a small, sad smile. "They're just doing their jobs, Marcus," he said softly. "They're good kids. They don't know." As he spoke those words, he glanced down at his own hands. The image flashed in his mind again, sharp and clear. Not the battle, but the moment just before. He was pressing a folded, sweat-stained letter from his wife into Private Miller's hand. The kid was scared. They all were. "You hold on to this for me, Miller," he'd lied. "It's good luck. We're both walking out of here to read it. The medal, the citation, those were just paper. The real thing was the memory of a promise made in the dark. A small act of humanity in the face of chaos. That was the part they couldn't know." General Thorne placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Well, we're going to make sure they learn." He turned back to the ashen-faced airline staff. "Mr. Pendleton will be taking my seat in first class. His bag will be brought on board personally, and I will be having a long conversation with your CEO as soon as we land." He then personally escorted Arthur down the jet bridge. As they walked into the cabin, a hush fell over the passengers. Every single person from coach to first class was silent. They watched as the 4-star general gently guided the unassuming old man to the best seat on the plane, the quiet hero who had asked for nothing more than what he was owed. The fallout was swift and decisive. The airline's CEO met the flight on the tarmac with a personal, profuse apology. Within a week, the company issued a public statement and announced a mandatory new training initiative for all customer-facing employees, a program to be designed in partnership with several prominent veterans organizations, focusing on respectful and proper recognition for service members and veterans. Brenda and Frank were indefinitely reassigned to administrative duties far from the public eye. Months later, Brenda was sorting through baggage claim reports in a windowless office when she saw him. Arthur Pendleton was standing with a woman she assumed was his daughter and 2 grandchildren, laughing as one of the children hugged his leg. Her heart hammered in her chest. She could have hidden, and part of her wanted to, but she walked out from behind the counter and approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Pendleton?" He turned, and for a second she saw no recognition. Then his eyes softened. I'm the woman from the airport, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse. Arthur looked at her for a long moment, then at his smiling granddaughter. He gave Brenda a simple, tired nod. Be kind, he said, his voice gentle. That's all. Just be kind to people. You never know the battles they've fought. He then turned back to his family, leaving her standing there with his simple, profound lesson. Stories like Arthur's are a powerful reminder of the quiet heroes who walk among us every day. Their courage and character are debts we can never fully repay, but we can always honor. If you believe in celebrating their valor, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of unassuming heroes.